Hello everybody, and welcome to my first review since the Roman holiday book. Today we will be talking about the first episode of the new Rwby Anime Icequeendom. But before we get into that, I just want to give you guys an overview of how these videos are going to be structured, just in case. So first I'll be doing a summary of the episode, highlighting the major plot points of it. From there I'll move on to my overall thoughts on the episode and what I like and don't like about it. Finally we will end with a more in-depth analysis of this episode, and my theories on what will happen in the next one. Though that's more for future videos as they release the first 3 episodes of the show, so it would be a bit hard to speculate about what happens next when the next episode is already aired. So with that done, I'm Weegee and these are my thoughts on the first episode of Rwby Icequeendom. The first episode opens with an overview of how dust was the driving factor in humans being able to combat the evil that are grim, before getting our first scene with one of our main characters, which surprisingly isn't Weiss given the name of the show. Instead, we get Rwby, who is visiting her mother's grave, lamenting the fact that Yang is off the beacon to become a huntress while she is still stuck at Signal. Before we cut to Weiss, who is being escorted by Klein to her trial, set up by her father to see if she can attend Beacon. Halfway through this amazing looking fight, we cut to Blake, and from here it flashes between Weiss's battle with the Armagigas and Adam and Blake's train heist. After the success of Weiss's battle and Blake's departure from the White Fang, we go back to Rwby, who is on her way to a familiar dust shop. During her shopping trip to the dust shop, she is robbed by everybody's favorite criminal, Roman Torchwick. Rwby manages to beat up Torchwick's lackeys, but Torchwick himself manages to escape up a fire escape with the help of a grappling hook that's inside his cane. Much like in the original, Rwby gives chase, and is almost blown up, this time by Torchwick. But luckily for her, Glinda manages to save her before the airship with Torchwick flies off. After a discussion with Osmond, the headmaster of Beacon, in a police station, we get an act of probably some sort of nepotism, as Rwby is invited to join Beacon 2 years early. We then get a scene that flashes between the various main characters getting onto the airship to Beacon, where we are treated to a joint narration by Osmond and Salem about humanity before the episode ends. Alright, that's a pretty simple episode, so let's start with what I liked about this episode, which was mostly everything. The most obvious thing that comes to mind, it's something even the most cynical Rwby fans can enjoy, which is the animation for the show. It is absolutely beautiful. You can tell the studio put a lot of work into making this show look as good as it could be. The fight scenes in particular are a spectacle to watch. They're super fluid, and some of the detail on the shots are amazing. They even managed to capture that distinct Rwby feel. And then there's the flourish they put on each of the semblances to make them feel that much more unique and awesome. The trailing light on Weiss's glyphs, the almost imperceivable shadows on Blake's clones, and the way the roses flutter during Ruby's petal burst. They are handled with such care and detail, it's amazing to see. But it's not just the combat itself that looks amazing, all the characters in the show look impeccable. This is the best that the Rwby cast has ever looked, which isn't a knock on the original show. I love how they look in that as well. It just goes to show you how much a larger budget affects the quality of the animation. I mean, look at the amount of detail on all their clothing. The way Ice's skirt flows from white to blue, and is the bottom of her skirt steel plated with little symbols on them? I don't think I ever noticed that. Then we have this shot of Klein. Look at the way the symbols on his vest visibility changes based on the lighting. That's so cool. It's the same with the other characters as well. The way that the purple in Blake's hair is more visible depending on the angle, and Rwby just looks super adorable in this version. Also, a shout out to Torchwick, who, while only appearing in one scene, looks absolutely amazing, and it's really awesome to see him alive. I hope we get to see Neo as well in this animation, because she will look amazing. Close, let's move to facial expressions, because they did a really good job making their emotions very visible on their face. Like, and going back to Weiss's fight with the Armagigas, we have this absolutely stunning shot of Weiss right after she gets hit. You can see the pain on her face, but also the defiance and determination to see this fight through, so she can go to Beacon and make a name for herself. In another shot later in the fight, where it zooms in on her eye, you can see the cut that would become her scar, and also the Armagigas in the reflection of her eye, which is a phenomenal detail. Before I gush too much about the animation, let's talk about something else, which is the story itself, which while for the most part remains the same, they did make some changes. But those changes don't really have an overarching effect on the overall story, which is still good. I especially love the way they flitted from character to character to convey that these things were happening at the same time. Weiss's fight and Blake's departure from the White Fang happened at the same time. There is not much else to say for the story, as well not much really changed for the overall story of the show at this point. The differences do start to get more grand in the following episodes, but overall this is still a really good introduction episode of a show. It's just the first episode, so the story's not like in depth yet, but it does a good job of introducing every single character. And let's talk about those characters, because I think that this is something that people were worried about, that they wouldn't feel like they do in the original show. And I can say that the characterization was pretty spot on. All the characters felt just like they did in the show, at least in this episode. Let's just say I have some things to say about Weiss in the coming episodes. Though she does feel like Volume 1 Weiss, which isn't a good thing. She's haughty, rude, and acts like she's better than everybody else. Ruby's still the same bright-eyed, bushy-tailed young girl she was before she experienced all the trauma life could throw at her. Blake's as mysterious as ever, and Yang's as cocksure as she has ever been, though we don't really see her much in this episode. As we get further into the show, we'll be able to talk more about their characters, as this episode, much like the color trailers, was more of a setup than anything else. Oh, we also got to see Tai Yang, and anytime we get to see the best father in the show is a plus for me. Now, as for things I didn't like about the episode, honestly there isn't really much, at least not anything major. It's a really good first episode with really good fights, and it doesn't have any scenes that felt like they dragged on or were rushed. But as I said, there were some minor things that bugged me. Such as, during Weiss's fight, we get a flashback to a scene with Weiss and Winter talking, which takes place during that training scene from Weiss's short, where Winter mentions that auras could only really take a couple of direct shots, but we've seen them take a lot more than that in the show, unless she's talking about Weiss specifically, which I'm pretty sure we've seen her take a couple more than that. Maybe not though, they always like using her as a jobber. Then there's the Torchwick escape scene. In the original we have Cinder attacking them. In this we only see Cinder as the pilot. I know that's a minor thing, but it kind of bugs me and I don't even know why. Maybe it's because it's not setting up Cinder as much as she was in the original, but she might not be a factor in this show. But aside from those very minor things, this episode was about as perfect as you can get for a first episode. So good job, Shaft, I give you a B+. The first scene I'd like to talk about is the opening scene where Rwby is talking to her mother about Yang's graduation, and her frustrations about her shortcomings. I love this scene, as it shows more of Ruby's insecurities about her abilities. We rarely get to see this side of her in the original, with her usually being ever the optimist. The only time I can think of off the top of my head is her conversation with Osmond in Volume 1. But that had more to do with Weiss's insulting of her leadership than Ruby's doubt of her leadership abilities in the first place. So that's nice to see from a character development standpoint. It helps Rwby feel a lot more human. We also get a slight expansion on Yang and Ruby's relationship, with Rwby talking about how she wishes she could be more like Yang. Again, while we know that Rwby looks up to Yang, we never really got a moment like this in the show. Scenes like these were one of the things I was hoping for when we got the first trailer. Scenes that expand upon the characters' personalities as well as the lore of Remnant. Now earlier I mentioned how they did a couple minor changes to the story of Rwby, one of which happens to be the next scene in the show, which is Weiss's fight against the Armagigas. This is actually a third iteration we've had of this fight. We have the original from the White trailer, which was Weiss fighting the Armagigas in solitude on her own, and I don't believe it was even a Grimm at that time. Then we have the manga version, which similarly to Icequeendom has Weiss fighting the now Grimm Armagigas as a trial for her father. Except in the manga, the other Shnees, aside from Jocks, aren't there. It is conducted by him and some random SDC board member in some underground facility the Shnees have for some reason. And they have Grimm there. I don't remember it making much sense. Then finally we have this one that has Weiss fighting in front of her family. Sans her mother, who is day drinking in the garden, which is a nice detail, because as Weiss says in volume, I believe 5, in her conversation with Yang, her mother wasn't very involved in her life after she started drinking. I think this version is the best version, because it best represents the kind of father Jocks is. He sets this almost impossible goal so that he can squash his children's disobedience and their dreams, so he can mold them into what he would like, into what he thinks the model Shnee should be. Interspliced in the middle of Weiss's fight, we have Blake's backstory, which is another thing that this show does that I really like. They set a timeline for the trailers. There was never really a set timeline for everything pre-Volume 1. In Icequeendom, if it can be considered canon, we finally get that. The yellow trailer appears happens before the rest of the trailers. From there, Weiss's trial and Blake's defection from the White Fang occur simultaneously. From there, we have the start of the show, with Rwby's fight with Torchwick. I don't know where Rwby's trailer fits into this. I'm probably pretty sure it's probably not even canon. Technically, it's just a fight with Grimm. This just so happens to be the next scene that I'd like to talk about. But first, I just want to mention how beautiful this scene is. From the smooth animation to the way Rwby flutters around with her semblance. With that out of the way, let's talk about more specifics, because there are a couple minor changes in this interaction here. One that I really liked, and one that I didn't really understand. The first one is Torchwick's reaction to Rwby. In the original, he was a bit bewildered. In this, he notes that Rwby is possibly a huntress, one from Beacon. Now, with the knowledge that we have from Roman Holiday, we know that this isn't the first time Torchwick has been in confrontation with a huntsman, so he's not really thrown off or bothered by this. He's bested huntsmen before. I also love the way they animated Torchwick's escape, with him using his cane hook to pull himself up the building. I don't think he had that in the original shows. It's something they added in Volume 3, I think. The other minor change is to the way Torchwick's escape was done in this version. It was Torchwick who attacked Rwby from the airship, not Cinder. All she did was pilot the ship. The only reason you know it was Cinder was because of her red clothing. I'm not really sure why they made this change, maybe to keep the maiden powers more secret, or to keep it from seeming weak, with Glinda pretty easily deflecting them in the original. They also made some additions to this scene, by giving Rwby a reason for being at the shop. She was buying a gift to celebrate Yang's acceptance in the Beacon. This isn't a huge life-changing detail, but it is still a nice scene that highlights the sisters' close relationship. Speaking of the acceptance scenes, this is another small addition made to the show. We see all the members of Rwby get an acceptance letter from Beacon, which makes it feel like more of an official school. I'd like to highlight Blake's acceptance letter scene, as I think it's the most important one. This scene takes place right after her defection from the White Fang. She is taking refuge in a barn when she gets it. When she sees it, she smiles, tears in her eyes, commenting about how it's her chance at a different path. This is a really great scene that highlights Blake's desire to no longer follow the path that Adam had been leading her down. That she no longer wants to use her abilities to hurt people, she wants to protect instead. She wants to become a better person. There are a few more scenes I'd like to talk about, the first two both being the ones with Tai Yang. First up, we have his conversation with Ozpin, where they talk about Team Stark and Rwby. Why this scene? Because it establishes a relationship between Ozpin and Tai. A positive one by the looks of it. Of the living members of Team Stark, the only one who we never really get to see their thoughts on Ozpin is Tai. But by the looks of their relationship, it seems to be a positive one, if not at the very least amicable. The next one is the farewell scene between Tai and his daughters. Again, nothing life-changing here, but it is a nice scene where we get to see how much Tai cares about his kids. This scene flows into the next scene I want to talk about, which is the informal introduction to the other main characters. I love the way that they animated this scene. It looks like one long organic scene, with the characters just sort of flowing by each other in the airship. This is another minor but major change, as it puts all the characters on the same airship, instead of all meeting at Beacon itself. This long scene includes the final scene I want to talk about, which is the scene where Weiss first sees Pyrrha, where it looks like Weiss has had her lesbian awakening. The scene where she straight up Googles Pyrrha to figure out who she is like the most real thing in the world. Googling your possible crush to see who they are before you talk to them. On a more serious note, though, this scene lays the groundwork for why Weiss approaches Pyrrha in the locker room. She knew that they would be thrown in teams, so she looked for the best possible teammate, one that she viewed to be on the same level as her, a person that wouldn't hold her back. Hell, they'd even elevate her. This scene brings us to the end of the episode, and the end of my analysis. Shaft did a really good job on this first episode, making it both accessible to new viewers while adding things for returning fans of the show. Overall, it was a really great first episode. So if you liked this video, give it a like and subscribe, and tell me what you thought of the first episode in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and see you next week for episode 2. Weegee out.